said he's been called a gun nut. Called yourself that, I guess. Those of us who support the right to keep and bear arms call that. It's usually not meant kindly, but let me say kindly, I perceive that I'm in a room full of liberty nuts. One of the things that's been a problem in working within the Republican and the conservative system in Washington is that the Second Amendment issues often are kind of like Cinderella, off in the corner, out in the kitchen, but not really for polite company. The Second Amendment issue is kind of embarrassing. We have to talk about guns, and we don't really like that. And we've had a bit of a culture chasm to get across, and it's nice to be in a place where I think these issues are appreciated as interrelated. And I'd like to point to some of the things that are going on right now that show just how interrelated they are, and how when we have the support of the Second Amendment as one of the issues involved in what's going on in the Congress, it might actually help push or stop the whole process that we're trying to promote at the time. The reaction after September 11th domestically was to further concentrate power in some of the laws that were passed and been talked about. Homeland Security, Department of Homeland Security was one of the first impulses. Nobody even thought that we had a militia, and frankly there wasn't much cry from the Second Amendment community that the Constitution already provided a solution for what had happened September 11th. And if we were interested in increasing our domestic security, whether it be guarding ports or power stations or whatever, we could do it even as late as World War II was done. Governors of the coastal states were having to deal with Japanese subs hurling firebombs into West Coast dry forests, and Germans were insinuating and provocateurs and the East Coast, and so the men and boys were actually called up into the militia. They were patrolling the coast, and the civilian air patrol was pressed into this kind of service. We didn't need a Department of Homeland Security. We already had it in the Second Amendment. I think we saw how this concentration of power worked so well, didn't we, after Katrina? There was a sort of coordinated effort by all levels of government to show how they could mutually reinforce a screw-up. And they really did a brilliant job of that. Meanwhile, it was the private sector. It was people defending their own homes. It was FedEx and Walmart and Home Depot that were positioning supplies so as soon as the storm was over, people had what they knew that people would want and need. It was the churches and private homes that were responding to the needs of the people afterwards. And all they could do at FEMA was to get some trailers down there that are still rusting at last count. Typical government reaction, and yet, again, had we had this notion that the militia was the proper response, we would have had local people involved in the local situation that would have been able to respond at the time and at the scene. And we wouldn't have had to bring in people from out of state that didn't have a clue about what was going on. We fought a battle and afraid we lost. It was mentioned that the NRA supported a candidate that was back in the Brady Law. Well, that's because they wrote the Brady Law. You have to understand that. See, it was going to make it easier for people who might have needed a new gun while they were out hunting, the old one broke or something, so they'd be able to go into a store and just, instead of having a waiting period, they'd be able to get this background check done instantly, and that would solve the problem. And no kidding, that was the logic. The fact that they would be setting up a national registry, which we're all told doesn't exist, but yeah, it does, actually. In fact, ever since 1968, we've had a national registry. When you go buy a gun at a gun store, you must fill out an unconstitutional federal form, and that is a national registry. That doesn't solve crimes, but but I suspect we know how it might be used someday, maybe to commit a crime against the people. The whole idea that the people have arms is inherent to a Republican form of government. The Swiss to this day have a saying that the emblem of a free man is a gun. Well, obviously there's an obverse to that, such as the people of Washington, D.C., or some of the other really tough gun control mechanisms in our country. The emblem of a slave is a disarmed man. That's really the issue that we're talking about. The whole web of liberty is tied onto this basic concept that the people are sovereign, and that's been mentioned here already. Well, sovereignty means that the buck stops there, wherever there is. And if there can't enforce it stopping there, then it's not sovereign. And when we have civilian disarmament, we really have a coup d'etat against the sovereign. That's what we're talking about. They're playing a chess game with us, and we're not doing that well in defense. And it's interesting how the growth of socialism in this country simultaneously jeopardizes so many sectors of our freedom and of our society. What was done recently in the government stimulus bill, because it will stimulate the government, was, among many other things, just chump change, was $20 billion to require a uniform, systematically set up computerization, interrelated computer system for all medical health records in the country. That's going to make things more efficient. I guess the trains need to run on time too. And bad enough, because that's all part of the nationalization, the socialization of our medical system. And even though the word done wasn't in there, believe me, this was a major, major step toward completing the disarmament of Americans. Many, many Americans. How? Through medical records? Yeah. Because there was a bill that the NRA supported after Virginia Tech. Instead of saying, well, we need to get rid of gun-free zones that have so empowered criminals, we need to start empowering people so they can shoot back at these creeps.